Officially, it is recorded as a knockout, but outside the boxing ring, Tim Haig's final fight is not so easily categorized.
Since Haig's death, we've had multiple people approach CTV News, some anonymously, with concerns about how the review into Haig's death has been handled and about the inner workings of the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission, the group that allowed him to fight.
We just want to warn our viewers that this report does contain scenes of violence in boxing and MMA fights. It may be disturbing to some viewers. Dan Grummett reports.
Round one.
My initial reaction was, oh my God, it finally happened.
Edmonton fighter Tim Haig has died in hospital from injuries sustained during a Friday night boxing match.
It breaks my heart that this actually happened, that this guy got killed in our ring.
The irony of it and the tragedy of it was that right from the beginning, prior to Tim Haig's death, it was probably, for the most part, fully preventable.
Tim Haig, a 34-year-old father and teacher, died 2 days after being knocked out in a boxing match by Adam Braidwood. It was a fight in which Haig was overmatched, physically and technically. Knocked down 3 times in the first round, ending with this uppercut in the second.
An absolute travesty, because if you go back 2 weeks and a month before the fight, it should never have been approved to happen to begin with.
The fight was sanctioned by the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, strap in for this super boxing matchup. Tim Haig in the gray shorts with
2 months earlier,
and a big knee! He's down.
Haig lost by technical knockout in an MMA superboxing event in Lethbridge.
Tim Haig back to his feet now, getting attended to.
4 months before that, Haig had lost by knockout in a boxing match in Edmonton.
We have a Canadian taking on a Polishman.
And in July 2016, Haig fought in this MMA bout in Sochi, Russia.
Oh, big head kick, that huge left head kick.
Losing via technical knockout. 3 knockouts within 9 months. According to ECSC policy, if a boxer has suffered 3 knockouts or technical knockouts from blows to the head within a 1-year period, ringside physicians shall impose a medical suspension for a period of not less than 1 year.
As we look at the Rumble replay,
it's unclear if the ECSC would factor in an MMA knockout when considering a medical suspension for a boxer. The ECSC is a regulatory body that the city says has transformed in a positive way in the past decade in terms of its structure and governance. But some disagree.
Edmonton and Montreal prior to 2009 used to be considered the 2 sort of gold standards in Canada for fighting commissions.
Great people to work with until 2009.
These 5 people have all worked for or with the ECSC. They approached CTV News to talk about their experiences.
I never felt like things were being addressed. I also worked under a regime of fear and intimidation. So if anybody was to oppose or make comments towards a better way of doing things, I saw them get shut down and removed, myself included.
In 2008, the city says a strategic review showed the ECSC lacked formal structure, which it says contributed to personal conflicts. The city says in wanting a more, quote, professional, standardized approach, it sought an executive director. Community Standards Branch Manager David Aitken was tasked with hiring one.
The people that were lined up for the interviews were not good. We were only allowed to ask certain questions.
The questions were supplied to you by David Aitken?
That's right.
One of the applicants was Pat Reid.
So I had asked David Aitken, do you know if Pat Reid is a male or a female? He said he didn't know. And obviously in their interview process, you could tell they knew each other. We didn't want Pat Reid. He didn't have the experience. We walked out of the building after the first interviews, and we already knew. We discussed it out on the sidewalk.
Fait accompli.
Yeah, it's done. Like, no matter what we say or what we do, this is going to happen. And it did happen.
The city says the first ever meeting between Reid and Aitken happened at the job interview in 2009, and that Reid was the successful candidate based on his education and experience. Reid made his presence felt early, according to these judges and ex-commission members who say protocol was relaxing.
Very early on, we saw that there was some very concerning things happening.
The Maximum Fighting Championships.
Edmonton, October 7th, 2011. Ryan Jimmo versus Ramu Thierry Sokaju.
Took home his gloves over the objection of 3 officials. When stopped and confronted, the fighter said, "No, your boss told me I could take him home. I need to stretch him out. My hands don't fit." Nobody knows what happened to those gloves. I know what I would do if I had those gloves. I'd soak them in water, I'd freeze them, and I'd smash them with a rubber mallet to break down all the foam with it. And those gloves showed up visibly tampered on television that night. This was an executive director who enabled a fighter to tamper. That right there should have been case closed. You're done from this sport for eternity. He didn't even get a reprimand.
Ask some people involved in the boxing industry, and they'll say Edmonton is the gold standard when it comes to fighter safety. Ask others, and you might get a different answer. These former commission members and Edmonton boxing judges say in 2009 they began to notice inconsistencies with operations of the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission. They say it started with the sanctioning of dream rules at an event called CCF 5. Dream rules allow techniques that are banned in formal mixed martial arts.
Knees to the head while a grounded fighter. A lot of the rules that have been gone in a long time in this sport.
The event recognizing these rules as legal was held in Edmonton in February 2010. The city claims the commission sanctioned the fight, approving a modified set of rules to reduce potential risk of serious injury. But former members say they wanted nothing to do with it.
We opposed the dream rules. It was vetoed.
After that event, these 5 say there were irregularities with protocol.
There's been last-minute replacements coming in to fight fighters where the person comes in being brought in by a driver from the airport the night of the weigh-in with hands the commission an envelope with half his medical requirements in it, the other half not completed.
Prior to the installment of Pat Reid as executive director in 2009, the commission was self-sufficient, operating without taxpayer money. In 2010, the city began funding the ECSC with money from the tax levy, amounts between $83,000 and $158,000 for all but 1 year. The number of sanctioned MMA and boxing events has gone down since 2010.
Back before the change, this transition of the commission, they were 30, 35 events a year. They're down to, 8 events now. So where is that money gone, and why is that type of money being spent?
Pat Reid is covering 8 to 10 events in a year, getting paid a salary, and from other commissions that I've spoken with, the amount of hours that it takes, Pat Reid is making way more money per hour than our own mayor is.
And as executive director, Pat Reid attended combative sports events. Brian Keynes claims he witnessed Reid drinking at an event.
We're talking about somebody who was actually drinking alcohol on their job. There's no way in a million years that he should be able to go on after drinking a whole bottle of wine at the table. I had put a formal complaint in about that. I was told by David Aiken it's not going to happen.
We were all asked to sign a new code of conduct sheet by Pat Reid, and the first 3 items on that code of conduct sheet was to summarize: you can't complain about me, you can't complain about the commission, it doesn't matter if we do anything wrong, you basically got to keep your mouth shut.
We asked the city to respond to the allegations in this story. We were denied interviews with Pat Reid, David Aitken, and a city representative, but we were supplied with a lengthy written statement. Asked about the decision-making within the commission, the city says the executive director does not have the final say over the decisions. However, the executive director does have discretion over the decisions, adding the allegations referenced are not consistent with the governance model now in place. As it pertains to allegations of glove tampering in 2011, the city said this was reviewed and we are satisfied that the gloves used were inspected and approved for use. And that complaint about the alcohol on the job, the city told us this complaint has been raised before and the city took appropriate steps in response, but told us they were not prepared to respond further. Ex-commission members say they submitted complaints over the years because they felt fighters' safety was being compromised.
And we basically spelled out almost to a T what was going to happen.
When I took this job 5 or 6 years ago now, the first thing I did is I went to our law branch and I said, okay, if somebody gets killed in an event and I'm in charge of it, what are lawyers going to look for?
Only a few hundred people saw it in person, and until the next morning, many didn't even know what they'd seen. But when word came that boxer Tim Hegg was on life support in hospital, for some it was a tragedy they saw coming for years. What followed should have been a swift and thorough investigation, but that wasn't what happened. Instead, the review into Hegg's death is ongoing as a potential lawsuit looms. Here's CTV's Dan Grummett, but first a warning, this report contains scenes of violence in boxing and mixed martial arts that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hegg is a Canadian heavyweight champion, the king of the cage, 6'4" and
anyone that meets him, they just are blown away that he's a fighter.
The Edmonton fans are phenomenal. They feed off the energy and they make me feel like an animal in there.
After the knockout, Tim Hegg stood up and managed to walk out of the ring. He died 2 days later.
We're talking about a kindergarten teacher that worked out in Beaumont that was killed in our city, and all they're doing is trying to protect themselves.
In the days following, questions were raised about Hegg's eligibility to compete.
I sent a poll.
MMA writer Mike Russell asked athletic commissions across North America if they, given Hegg's fight history, would have sanctioned the bout.
Not one said they would sanction that fight without further medical testing.
2 months passed. Neither the City of Edmonton nor the Edmonton Police had announced an investigation into Hegg's death. For the sake of comparison, consider the case of 26-year-old Rondell Clark, who died 3 days after a fight in Massachusetts this past August. That same day, the county's district attorney, in cooperation with state and local police and the local athletic commission, launched an investigation.
Concern about how long
Edmonton's mayor said the extra time was necessary in order to get the right third party in place. Hegg's family grew impatient.
We try not to talk about it because it frustrates us all, to be quite honest.
There was one development in those 2 months. The city's deputy manager told CTV News Pat Reid had been removed as executive director due to the ongoing review. An interim executive director was put in his place, the man who hired him.
David Aiken, and Pat is still working in support of David.
Finally, in late August, the city announced international consulting firm Myers Norris Penny would head up what it called the review.
It's killing me that it's called a review now. It was called an investigation, now it's called a review.
There is absolutely no reason whatsoever a death investigation should have taken 2 months to decide how to move forward, and let alone turned over to a group that has absolutely no experience investigating combat sports whatsoever.
Does anyone here have a shred of confidence that that review will find anyone responsible or anybody?
Not at all. It's not going to happen. There's no confidence there.
It's my opinion that they're going to be led in a direction that the city and the commission wants to go.
2 weeks after the third-party reviewer was announced, a major MMA event took the spotlight.
Good evening to you from the City of Champions.
Ahead of UFC 215 on pay-per-view, this preliminary match was aired on cable television, witnessed by some 18,000 fight fans in Edmonton and fans across the globe.
Yeah, he's getting beat up. 14, 16 unanswered blows.
Look at the ground strikes, 114-11, and in terms of the significance...
They could have stopped this.
The referee was Kyle Cardinal, who faced heavy criticism on social media for not stopping the fight.
This fight is over. This kid's toughness is carrying him.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he's taking unnecessary punishment. He's not fighting back.
He hasn't been defending for almost a minute and a half.
He's just kind of defending himself.
It's disgusting.
Wow.
This is absolutely disgusting. But if the referee's not doing his job, what the hell is the commission doing?
Ladies and gentlemen, after 3 rounds...
The man who took the beating, Canadian Gavin Tucker, suffered 4 broken bones in his face. These 5 people, all of whom have a past connection to the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission, say Cardinal is a longtime favorite of former executive director Pat Reid.
Pat Reid had Kyle judging boxing, and as far as I know, Mr. Cardinal has no experience as a boxing judge.
2 days before UFC 215, Reid was doing the weigh-ins as usual, while David Aitken stood against the wall, even though Aitken is supposed to be the man in charge. And just prior to the main event, Bruce Buffer announced who does what.
Sanctioned by the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission, Director Pat Reid, Manager in charge David Aitken.
The city says Buffer correctly identified the roles of each man, but this group wonders why Reid was even mentioned. Meanwhile, the script for Tim Haig's story is still being written. The Haig family tells CTV News it has made no decisions regarding possible legal action and is waiting on the results of the review. This past September in the U.S., the family of brain-injured boxer Magomed Abdusalamov won a major ruling. It sued the New York State Athletic Commission for recklessness, gross negligence, and medical malpractice and settled for $22 million.
What is that going to cost the taxpayer in terms of a death now that a precedent's been set for injury?
Last month, I contacted Pat Reid about responding to the allegations in our stories. I called his cell phone and left a message. My call was returned the next day, not by Pat Reid, but by David Aitken. On the phone, Aitken was open to an interview, provided he had permission from the city to speak, and that we submitted a list of topics that we'd be discussing. We sent the city that list, and a week later we were told that interview would not be happening, and the city was submitting a written statement. So we tried to talk to them in person at their offices on the 17th floor of Edmonton Tower. It's where the directory still lists Reid as the ECSC executive director.
Hi, you've reached voicemail of Pat Reid.
We're trying to talk to Pat Reid.
Okay, was he expecting?
No.
Is he in?
Pat is a very busy man, and he's just not available.
After alerting city staff we wished to speak with Reid, the deputy city manager spoke to us.
We're going to get you some information tomorrow.
Yeah, we knew we were going to get a written statement.
Yeah, a written statement tomorrow.
Yeah, we just didn't think that really suffices.
It's really not appropriate for you guys to be up here.
Why not?
Because this is like a working floor of city staff. So, Pat's not available.
Why isn't Pat available?
He's doing his job.
Why can't we interview either of them?
Well, I think you know the background on this issue.
I understand why we can't interview them about the Haig investigation, but why can't we interview them about the entire decade previous?
We've been working on this internally, and the conclusion we got to was we have to just go through our written channels at this point.
So is there any hope we're getting to chat with Pat Reid at all, or David Aitken?
Not in the foreseeable future, no.
This is the current commission, which met publicly in September, and there was David Aitken in the role of interim executive director. While the city would not comment on Cardinal as UFC referee, the commission's chair says it's reviewing the UFC 215 preliminary fight and the conduct of referee Kyle Cardinal.
I think it's a rush to judgment to say that he made any mistake.
He adds he's confident in Myers Norris Penny to conduct a proper and thorough review. According to the city, the review into the death of Tim Haig is expected sometime this fall.
This was all brought to light because of the death of Tim Haig. What if nothing happens?
That's what we're afraid of.
And
And Dan Grummett joins me now. Dan, there was certainly a lot of information to take in, not only in that story, but in all three parts of this series. Let's go back now to part one. The city said that Pat Reid had the proper experience getting hired. Ex-members who interviewed him disagreed. What was his experience?
Well, if you go back to the resume Reid used for that job interview in 2009, the only mention of experience in combative sports was his work as a consultant with Sport Canada. That was a position he held until 1989, 20 years before he interviewed for the ECSC role. Now, in speaking with ex-commission members, they say that experience didn't cut it, nor did his later experience with other types of sports. The other thing that stands out, Carmen, his references, the city manager at the time, Al Moorer, and the now current city manager, Linda Cochran.
And of course, we can't forget that there are people affected here. The Haig family, you spoke with Ian Haig in your story. You mentioned they're considering legal action, but they're waiting.
Yes, they're waiting for the results of that MNP review to come out before deciding what to do on this. We do know MNP sent people to interview the Haig family recently, but Tim's brother Ian tells me a reviewer told him they're not conducting this review to try to assign blame. They're doing it to find out if there are any gaps in protocol and procedure to see if they can be improved and to ensure what happened with Tim does not happen again. The city has told us officially the review will contain, quote, meaningful recommendations.
And Dan, that review, there is possibly a new timeline on that.
Yeah, that's right. Initially it was supposed to be out by Halloween, then it was pushed back to mid to late November. I asked the city last week if that timeline's changed, and now we're being told this fall, and the first day of winter is December 21st.
Okay, well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. Great work on this series.
Thank you.
Strong reaction to a CTV investigation into the Edmonton Combative Sports Commission. Since our three-part series aired, we've been contacted by several people involved in combative sports. Some are applauding ex-commission members and boxing judges for speaking out. Others are coming to the defense of the commission. Joining us now, CTV's Dan Grummett, who worked on this series. And Dan, even more people adding their voices to this story today.
That's right, Aaron. We've been approached by promoters, coaches, fighters, even more former commission members, all of whom have differing opinions on our investigative reports. And before this story, a warning, there are images of violence in boxing and MMA fights that some viewers might find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
You know, it's so sad. These people can sit here and judge Pat.
This is Lino Santoro, a boxing trainer and ex-promoter. He's the one who brought in the Dream Rules fight we mentioned in part 2.
Because I was here when the changeover happened.
Santoro believes this group of ex-commission members and judges who expressed serious concerns about the ECSC have an axe to grind.
They're disgruntled employees. I'm telling you right now, the direction that those people perceive is totally wrong.
The group we spoke with believes the death of local boxer Tim Haig could have been prevented, saying the ECSC should not have sanctioned the bout based on Haig's fight history. They also pointed to the commission's restructuring in 2009 and the hiring of Pat Reid as executive director, saying the new regime led to changes in protocol which may have jeopardized fighter safety. Santoro says Reid changed things for the better.
Pat right now is muzzled by the city. He can't defend himself. He cleaned up more than what you guys know or that are let to know.
One example Santoro gave is increased monitoring of the taping of fighters' hands to improve safety.
There definitely was a point in the third round where
This is Kyle Cardinal, the referee of that UFC prelim fight shown to you in part 3.
Yeah, he's getting beat up.
It's easy to look back at a fight after it's happened and say, well, maybe I could have stopped it here or stopped it there.
The group who approached CTV claimed Cardinal was a favorite of former executive director Pat Reid.
People can call me Pat Reid's favorite referee. I'm the only referee. The lineup behind me to do this job is zero.
Cardinal says his experience with the current commission has been positive, and allegations of protocol being bent are mostly news to him.
Well, of course I've heard things behind the scenes. When you show up to do these events and stuff, people are always talking.
And he wasn't there the night of Tim Haig's last fight, but Cardinal was once Haig's corner man. The two were friends, and he eagerly awaits the results of the city's third-party review.
You know, I want answers just like anybody else.
Cardinal hopes that review leads to stricter bylaws to enhance medical testing and admissibility to prevent injury or worse. And the trainer who, in that story, who defended Reid admitted to me that even he feels standards for fighter safety need to be improved, Aaron.
Dan, you mentioned last night the review is expected to bring recommendations, but there are already some potential changes in the works in that industry.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about creating a provincial combative sports commission. Edmonton's mayor, Don Iveson, has expressed interest in that before. We know it's something the city of Red Deer would like to see as well. And even that city tabled a resolution to have other Alberta cities call on the provincial government to do just that. Municipalities will vote on that resolution in Calgary next week.
Dan, thank you.
You're welcome.